Trauma Coalition. I've been the director there for 10 years now. If you aren't familiar with the coalition, we are a drug, alcohol, violence, trauma, poverty, obesity prevention agency serving kids and adults in Warren County. Direct service to about 2,200 kids a year, adults about 350. We have a full-time staff of 4 and 2 very part-time people. Very dedicated to the thing. The staff has been around for a long time. So I just finally got an administrative assistant after 10 years, but before that, we'd all worked there at least 8 years. So we worked together as a team for quite a while. I'm here. Okay, where's the workout? I'm here today. I want to talk to you a very quick run through ACEs, or Reverse Childhood Experience. If you aren't familiar, what we have discovered is trauma is basically the driving force for everything horrible that happens to us as people. So I want to talk about that very quickly and where the coalition is going and where we've gone. So we have a project right now. There we go. Thank you. Yep. We have a project right now that we started this year. It's a Victims of Crime Act grant called Courage. And Courage is operating at both middle schools in the non-traditional programs, and for kiddos who get referred to Reflections, which is the in-school suspension program for Warren County kids. These children have to be victims of or have witnessed trauma. Our goal was 65 kids for the year. We have served 68. We have 5 more waiting to come in. It's February. So one of the components and the reason I am here is it's a 3-pronged approach. So what we've discovered is 3 touches from 3 caring adults is really what helps build resilience and bolster children. And so we have a behavioral health coach who tries to help them in the classroom and does assessments and make that connection so they can learn better. We have a woman who's delivering a program called COPE, which is a cognitive behavioral therapy-based program, and the kids get that. And then we have another woman who's providing services, but we're working on more services, so each child has a mentor. And I'm here to see Rotary because we need mentors. Now, so mentors in this case, and I'm going to do this real quick. So the mentors in this case, what we're asking is that you commit to a lunch hour a week to meet with these children and be paired with them within the school. And you get training and stuff to help bolster them as you go through the year, but to have some support for kids who really don't have anything. So I mean, these kids, for our cliques, are physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse, or have witnessed their parents being beaten, basically. A lot of them are 11 years old. And so we would like to try to change their outcome. So very quickly, how many of you are familiar with ACEs? Okay, so I'm going to go really fast. So what we've discovered is that your body remembers trauma even if you do not remember the trauma happening to you. And not only does your body remember the trauma, but your body will actually change. So your genes change in accordance with you being exposed to trauma. And they did an experiment with rats, so I'm just going to talk about that very quickly. And they put mama rats in a cage, and they got an electrical shock when they introduced the smell of Japanese cherry blossoms to these female rats. And they learned to fear the smell of cherry blossoms, so when it was introduced, they would all run and huddle together. They bred the rats' pups were put in the cage. They were not given any kind of electrical shock, but when the smell of cherry blossoms came in, they ran and cowered in fear. They had learned genetically to be afraid of that smell. When they had pups, their pups did the same thing. So their genes have changed. So if you're exposed to trauma, even if it doesn't happen to your child, you can pass trauma through your genes to give them trauma, okay? Very short versions. All right, tell me I'm doing this, but
Down.
Down? Okay. There you go. Okay, so very quickly, we all are aware we have a nervous system. We would like to operate in our parasympathetic nervous system. That's a system where we're calm, we're at peace. When you're struggling with trauma, if you're lucky, you operate out of your parasympathetic nervous system. This is your fight or flight system. And what happens when you're in fight or flight? Your body releases cortisol and adrenaline, and that's great if a truck's about to run over you and you need to get out of the way. However, it's not great if you are experiencing any kind of trauma. And what happens for kids who are flooded, so they're constantly in a state of something really bad could happen, that system stays on, and as they go through development, they actually get to a place where it kills the seedling cells that are supposed to come on when you get to puberty and activate other things, and in fact, they do not, they fail, and so then development is delayed and you have all sorts of different negative repercussions from that. So just quickly, at birth, you don't have a lot of nervous system connections because you don't need a lot of things when you're little. Basically, feed, change, sleep. So those are the connections you made, bond with your caregiver. When you get to be about elementary school, as you have more and more experiences, you get more and more connections. When you go to puberty, they basically have what they call pruning. So you go through and your body cuts out unnecessary connections. So the ones that have been instilled longer are the ones that stays. It prunes the others. It's a very simplified version of what's happening here. But sometimes some of the places, like I told you, the seedlings will get trimmed away because you've gotten so much cortisol going in your body, and then you're not able to make helpful connections later. So I talked just a little bit about what this looks like in the classroom and what teachers see around this. So where we get into trouble in schools is that children have behaviors that really for their situations make sense. So it's a survival thing, and I realize probably most of you aren't teachers. I taught school once upon a long time ago, and I can tell you, sorry if you're offended by this analogy of me comparing children to groundhogs, but you'll understand. So you think about a groundhog, and the groundhog pops up out of the hole. What does the groundhog do? The groundhog looks around to make sure that nothing's going to get it, and then it runs off to go do what it's going to do, and if danger comes, it goes back down in the hole, right? So when I taught school, I'd have kids who would do this a lot of times and get up and look around, and what I didn't know then, because we didn't know this about trauma, was that they didn't feel safe. So that's that. I'm looking around for danger. They would also sometimes do this. And they'd stand in the back of the room with the wall behind them so no one could get them and be looking if things didn't feel safe. Now, they would get yelled at and they would get sent, not in my classroom, but trust me, in every other classroom in the building, they would get yelled at and sent to the office because they couldn't stay in their seats. And what I'm telling you is we're seeing fear response. We are seeing their survival instinct, and the collision is school expects them to sit still, school expects them to not wiggle, school expects them to do all of these things, and this child is really acting on their survival impulse that says this isn't safe. I don't feel safe here right now for whatever reason. And yet we punish them for what is keeping them alive in their day-to-day situation. Problem. Okay, so ACE study. Man, I'm talking fast. Okay, so different parts of your brain get affected in different ways and are more susceptible to trauma at different times in your lifespan than at other times. So your amygdala, which is basically fight or flight, and your hippocampus, which is your memory and your social cues, and they're important for your relationships, are most at risk for maltreatment, particularly for boys between birth and 3, and for sexual abuse, both, during that time period. Now, because of the pruning and what I was talking about before, you may not see some of this negatively impacting kiddos until they come to puberty. So 9 to 13 years later is where you start to see some of these behaviors or negative things happening. You're like, what had just happened to my child? And we think that it's puberty, but it really could be the impacts of what happened to them very early on going forward. And I didn't, because I didn't have long to talk, actually put in a picture of the brain and the difference in brain development for a child who grew up in a nurturing environment and a child who did not. And at 3 years old, the differences in their brain is astonishing. And then we wonder why this child isn't achieving or isn't fitting in. And then what I work in the jail, I didn't say that, but I work in the jail 2 days a week, and I'm seeing the results of long-term trauma in adults on a regular basis. So this is the period we talked about, sort of historical or intergenerational adversity, and this could come anywhere. So I mean, this can come from slavery being passed along, this can come at Native Americans, the Holocaust, picket. That's coming through generation to generation. You already have some trauma. pile a little adverse childhood experience on top of that, you start to see failures in your social and functioning, your ability to function. You start to see health risk and health risk behaviors, so self-medication, that kind of thing, which leads to disease, which then leads to early death. And what they say, and I'm sorry, some people say this to me, I'm depressing, I'm sorry, but what they say collectively across the population is that for people who have an ACE score of 6 or higher, they see about a 20-year loss in life. So your life expectancy decreases by about 20 years. This is morbid, but I look at the obituaries in the paper, mostly because I run a drug prevention agency, and I'm looking for overdose deaths, I'll be honest. But if you look at how many people in this area die in their late 50s and early 60s, it is astonishing. And I'm here to tell you, this is the base for a lot of that. Okay, so how common are these? When they did the ACE study to begin with, Dr. Robert Anda and Dr. Vincent Folletti from Kaiser and from the CDC came together to do it. There were 17,000 people who were Kaiser Permanente customers, upper middle class. Only about 5% of them didn't have a high school degree. Many had advanced degrees. So these are people who came from privilege. This is when they did the 17,000, what they found them reporting. So they asked 10 questions on the ACEs. When I had my trauma training, when I became a master trauma trainer, I actually had my training with Dr. Anda. And I asked him and said, okay, but on this survey, and if you aren't familiar with the ACEs, we won't do it in here because I can't un-traumatize you if you've had a lot of trauma, so I'm not going to traumatize you at this point. But I said to him, there are clearly things that are missing on this survey. So it doesn't ask things like, did you have a parent die? Did you have a sibling die? Did you have cancer? Were you homeless? Some of those really big things that would be huge traumas are not asked on this survey. I cannot tell you how many people I encounter in jail who have lost a parent. I don't mean lost, they ran away. I mean lost, they passed away when they were children. So these were the categories. They sort of put them in different areas, and this is happening in the family. We also objected and said, what about battered fathers? Did not ask, but doesn't mean didn't happen. Or witnessing your sibling getting the life beat out of them every day. Maybe it didn't happen to you. So just think about, this is all they asked. These are the percentages. That's more than 1 in 4 in some of these categories, guys. In middle class, upper middle class. Doesn't take into account poverty. It doesn't take into account any of those things. So just, these numbers are much higher. When they look at it in a Native American population, the numbers are insane. Okay, so here you can sort of see the breakdown, and I'm not going to spend time, but they're talking about, how common it is. 67% of people have one. If you have one, the chances that you'll have two are 87%. So here they're giving you charts of the breakdown of these. So if you witness violence against your mother, the chances that you will experience these things increase incrementally based on how often you witness that. And notice that you may also experience all of those things. I'm sorry, I'm going really fast. This is really important. So it is a dose-response relationship. The more ACEs that you have, the bigger your number of health problems, okay? So you saw 16% of people have 4 ACEs. That was in that middle class population. What do you think the percentages are if you're coming out of poverty? And we're talking about, people are getting killed in your neighborhood or all those other sorts of things that are traumatic. They would be even higher, so you have even more health outcomes that are happening. Okay, so here's one with liver disease, and it just sort of shows you the difference there. All right, this was really interesting. I just went to a trauma training Friday, and I really liked this. This is the first time I'd seen this slide of the fields, and I know some of you guys can't see this back. This is not my slide. I stole it. But the trauma, the ADHD, and then the overlap. So the overlap, difficulty concentrating, learning in school, easily distracted, often don't seem to listen, disorganized, hyperactive, restless, difficulty sleeping, as a common between trauma on both sides. Back in the day when I taught school, we didn't know anything about trauma. 100% would we have said, this kid is ADHD. And you'd have been having people come in and do classroom observations and send them to the doctor to get those pills to get what's going on. I look back at a child I had in particular, and he had been a problem all through school. And his, and know that they'd never decided that he might have ADHD, and this kid really had trouble. Well, what I knew, but I didn't know, was his father had struggled with substance use disorder. He had walked out onto 81, high on PCP, and had told his friends, watch what I can do, and he stuck his hands out to stop a semi. Yeah, you don't need me to tell you the rest of the story. But, so this child had lost his father very traumatically, then, anyway. So if I knew then what I knew now, I would have started in a different place. But we just didn't know. I mean, that was in the 90s. This study wasn't even done then. Okay, so quickly, across populations, population attributable risk. So, say on this chart, suicide. 67% of suicides are attributable to adverse childhood experiences. So if I could make adverse childhood experiences stop, I could prevent 67% of the suicides that happen. Or life dissatisfaction. I'm going to show you another one. Look at anxiety. Look at marijuana use. Okay, all coming from these adverse childhood experiences. So here's a different look. Now, remember I told you I run a drug prevention agency. Look at the IV drug use. 78% of IV drug use related across the population to adverse childhood experiences. I've been doing this for 20 years. We've gotten this wrong locally we've managed to figure it out about 3 years ago. We started changing what we're doing. But I got it wrong for 17 years. So we look around and go, well, why is this happening? Because we've been doing all the wrong things all along. So now we have to totally change how we operate. But can you see how what we do really needs to change if what we're trying to fix is these things? That's what I'm trying to do. We're in the middle of an opiate crisis right now. I'd really kind of like that to stop. But I got to help people heal. And I've got to build resilience. I can't keep bad things from happening. Wish I could, can't. So we've got to figure out how do we build resilience in people, how do we give them hope, how do we lift them up so that these aren't their outcomes. And we also have to help adults heal so the genetic code changes so they don't keep passing these on to their kids. Okay? I know, I'm talking as fast as I can. So here are your core effectiveness. Okay. So these are the areas that they want us to look at. They want us to look at building capabilities. These people need to feel connected, not only to their families, but to their community. There needs to be a sense of hope. There needs to be a sense of purpose. We need to do those things. And when I work in the jail, I can tell you that when I finally get people to, you matter, you can do things differently, here's a sense of hope and a direction and a purpose for you, those are the people that I believe are going to get well, and I'm not going to see them come back to jail. Okay? It's very difficult getting people there who've struggled with this for a really long time. And they might have a mental health that, they've had all these, so they've got maybe a mental health diagnosis, and they have, substance use disorder of some kind. So it's not easy sledding, folks. But this is what we're working for. And that community, the culture, something bigger than ourselves, wherever we're operating from with that. So, positive view lets me know I'm important and valuable. My biggest message to people in jail, you matter. I cannot tell you how many times I say that to people and they burst into tears. And I'm like, okay, what did I just say? And I'm thinking, I was like, why are you crying? No one has ever said that to me in my life. No one has ever told me in my lifetime I matter. How simple is that to tell people that they matter and treat people with dignity and respect? I'm sorry. Everyone deserves to be treated with the respect. I don't care what they've done. They're still people. They still deserve my respect. And I work with them all, guys. So here are the resilience factors that we're working on. The more we layer, the more we go. So what I'm talking about. This has 2 or more. Research for us, 3 or more. We want to take care of our kids. Are we paying attention? But not just our kids, our adults. If people are struggling and suffering, this is not helpful. Looking the other way doesn't mean it doesn't exist. It just means we're not helping. We're not helping our community get better. And then I do a lot of teaching the thing about building social capital, working outside of where you're operating. I do basically a bridges out of poverty in the jail. This is how the middle class works. This is how the middle class thinks. This is what's important. These are the things you need to do to survive in the middle class. Because unless somebody teaches you that and you're coming out of poverty, you don't know. All right. So look how fast they are. So here's my pitch. We really, really, really need mentors for these kids. I told you, we've got We've got 62 right now in service, 6 who've now come out of service, and 5 more waiting to come in. That means I have 67 kids who need mentors. 1 day a week at lunch. You can pick the time, there are many different times. You can pick the schools. So Warren County Middle, Skyline Middle, the non-traditional programs. I have applications on the table. You have to go through the school system, background check, TV test, all that stuff. It says there's a fee. Just say you're doing it for Project Courage. The grant will pick it up and pay. There is not a fee. You will go through training. We will get you paired and matched up. Because we want to change what is happening for our kids in Warren County. Now let me say one more quick thing and I'll shut up. That being said, we are also getting tons and tons of training around ACEs. More than you can imagine. And bringing that back into the community to do longer trainings. I told you this is a short version of a 45-minute training, which is a short version of an hour-and-a-half training, which is a short version of a 4-hour training that we are trained to do for the community. We are going to bring in another one. So we're going to be trained in 2 different ones of these, and also mental health first aid. And spread that. Right now I have a grant that's paying me to get people trained on this, and I have money to pay you to go out and train other people on this, because it's so important that we know. Because if we don't know, we can't change what's happening. And we can't lay that foundation. And you don't know, how else can I help? Right? There are only so many of us. The more soldiers I have who have the same message, the more we can get the information out, the more people will do things and change how we interact. So, there is my pitch. Please, if you have the time, 1 day a week at lunch, there are kids who really, really need you. We had a parenting dinner last night, and we're trying to help the parents too. And give them this information, train them, and help them support their kids. And they want to learn. It's just, if you don't have any background and you're starting from nothing, the expectation that they're going to get it right to begin with is not realistic. So I applaud them every time they come, because these people have very hard lives. One of them was there, she said, oh, I know where I know you. You come into the female treatment pod of the jail. And I'm like, yeah. And she said, IV drug user recovering, and she and her husband were both there trying to get it right for the kids. So it's really easy to judge hard and go, y'all suck and you're horrible people. It's not true. They just need help and they need support. And we have that choice to go, oh, we're going to treat you like throwaway people, or we're going to help you. And that's where the community is going to go. So thank you very much.
Awesome.